I still remember the way they laughed. It wasn't just a chuckle or a harmless joke. It was the kind of laughter that echoes long after the moment passes, sharp, mocking, soaked in disbelief. I can still hear it, layered under the clinking glasses. And soft jazz that played at our wedding reception. "She's a waitress, man. You're marrying a waitress?" Those words weren't said to my face, of course. They whispered them when they thought I couldn't hear. But I did. I heard every word. And though I smiled through it, shaking hands and thanking guests, deep down, it stung. But this story isn't about their laughter. It's about the silence. That came after, because my wife, Elena, was not just a waitress, and I was not just a fool who married beneath him. We met on a rainy Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview that didn't go well, again. I was sitting alone at a small diner near the train station, trying to collect what little dignity I had left. That's when she came over, holding a coffee pot and the kind of smile that didn't feel forced. "Refill?" I looked up. Her name tag read Elena, and her eyes looked tired, but kind. She poured me a fresh cup without waiting for an answer. I added an extra shot of hope. "On the house," she said with a wink. I laughed. And I don't laugh easily. That was the first time in weeks I felt like a person again, like someone who mattered. She didn't know my name. She didn't ask what I did for a living. She just saw someone drowning quietly in his own silence, and chose to throw a rope. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back to that diner. Not for the food, it was mediocre at best, but for her. She remembered my name, my favorite drink, and even that I hated tomatoes in my sandwich. She listened when I talked. She cared when I didn't think anyone else did. And somewhere between those late breakfasts and shared smiles, I fell in love with her. It wasn't flashy. There were no fireworks. Just the quiet certainty that she was real in a world that felt increasingly fake. When I told my family about her, they were surprised. My mother said, "A waitress, but you're an MBA graduate." My friends were worse. They joked about how I'd probably never see a decent vacation again, or that I'd spend the rest of my life getting free pancakes instead of building a future. But none of them knew Elena the way I did. They didn't know that she took care of her sick grandmother every night after work, that she read business books on her lunch breaks because she didn't want to be a waitress forever, that she saved every tip she got, down to the last dollar. To build something, anything better, they didn't know how fiercely she loved, how loyal she was, how hard she worked. So I asked her to marry me, not with a fancy proposal. I couldn't afford that then. I proposed to her outside the diner under a flickering street lamp, holding a plastic umbrella between us. She cried. We got married in a small ceremony in my uncle's backyard. It wasn't glamorous. Her dress wasn't designer. My shoes didn't match my belt. But she was beautiful, radiant even, and when I looked at her, I knew I'd made the best decision of my life. But the laughter followed us. At the reception, in quiet glances, in veiled comments. Even on social media where someone posted, "He married a waitress. Guess love really is blind." I said nothing. Not because I agreed with them, but because I didn't need their approval. What I needed was to build a life with her, and that's exactly what we did. At first it was hard. We lived in a small one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and neighbors who played loud music until 3 a.m. She worked double shifts. I took whatever freelance gigs I could find. We barely had enough to scrape by, but we laughed more in that tiny apartment than I ever had in my entire life. Every night she'd fall asleep with her business book still open beside her. Every morning she'd wake up with ideas scribbled in the margins, concepts I didn't always understand, but that she clung to like they were golden threads leading her somewhere bigger. And then one day, something changed. She came home early, from her shift, breathless, her hair a mess, eyes wide with excitement. "I have an idea," she said, throwing her apron on the couch. "I think it could actually work." I watched her pace across our tiny living room, animated and electric, talking about meal kits, customizable food plans, and a gap in the market she believed no one had noticed yet. I didn't understand all of it, but I listened. I believed in her. So I did the only thing I could. I used every penny we had saved, cashed in a small bond my grandmother left me, and helped her launch a website. It didn't take off overnight. But neither did she give up. She worked that idea like she worked everything else, with stubborn fire and quiet brilliance. Some nights she cried. Some nights she screamed into a pillow because the code broke, or no one visited the site, or she was just too tired. But she never stopped, and I never stopped believing. If only the ones who laughed could see her now. It took nearly 6 months for her website to get its first 100 consistent users. We celebrated that small win with instant noodles and a toast with leftover champagne from our wedding. I remember her eyes glowing in the dim light of our tiny kitchen, holding her chipped mug like it was made of gold. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, and she was right. Slowly but surely her business grew. Word-of-mouth social media shares, a small feature in a local paper. Every piece added another brick to her foundation. I watched her learn on the fly, coding, marketing, customer service, logistics. There were days when I barely saw her. She'd work until dawn, sleep for a few hours, and start again like nothing could stop her. I kept my job, brought in what little I could, but she was the engine now. She had found something that gave her purpose beyond tips and orders and late-night shifts, and the world was starting to notice. But not everyone was happy about it. At a family reunion, one of my cousins pulled me aside. "So your wife's still running that little cooking thing?" he asked, smirking. "It's a customized meal kit business," I replied calmly. "Right. Sure. Well, good luck with that," he said, chuckling as he walked away. They still didn't get it. They still saw her as the girl with a notepad and an apron, not the woman building something revolutionary from scratch. And to be honest, part of me still carried the weight of their judgment, even though I believed in her, believed in us. That laughter from our wedding still echoed sometimes in my mind. I guess that's the thing about shame. Even when you know it's not yours to carry, it still finds a way to settle into your bones. Elena noticed. She always did. Late one night, when she caught me staring off in silence, she came and sat beside me on the couch. "You regret it, don't you?" she asked softly. I turned to her, startled. "What?" "Marrying me." My heart cracked at those words. "No," I said, taking her hand. "Never. I hate that they can't see you the way I do." She smiled a little sadly. "They don't need to. I didn't build this for them." And she meant it. A few months later, she got a call from a mid-level investor who had tried her product, loved it, and wanted to talk. We met him in a coffee shop, sitting on second-hand chairs that squeaked every time we leaned forward. He was kind, honest, and surprisingly impressed with everything Elena had built on her own. He didn't laugh at her. He listened. He saw the fire in her, the kind I'd seen from day one. He offered her a small seed investment, just enough to hire a couple of people, and improve the website. Elena took it, but only on her terms. She wanted full creative control. She wanted her vision, not someone else's version of it. That moment, watching her negotiate with a confidence that could shake walls, I realized something. She wasn't just growing a business. She was becoming something more than a waitress, more than my wife, more than the labels they had thrown at her since day one. She was becoming a force, but with growth came challenges, real ones. Her days were longer. Her circle of friends grew smaller. There were missed birthdays, forgotten dinners, moments when exhaustion made her forget to say goodnight. Some nights I'd fall asleep alone, hearing the clack of her keyboard in the next room, and though I understood, a small part of me missed the simplicity of our early days. I missed the quiet breakfasts, the long walks, the way she used to sit with her legs tucked under her, reading out loud from business articles with wide-eyed excitement. Now her eyes were sharper, her voice more measured. She was evolving beautifully, but part of me was still standing where we began. One evening, as she prepared for a pitch to a major retail partner, she looked at me and said, "I think we're finally going to make it." I smiled, proud, but quiet. She paused. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm proud of you," I said. I miss you sometimes." She softened, walked over, and wrapped her arms around me. "I miss us too," she whispered. "But I promise you, everything I'm doing, it's for us, for the life we dreamed of when we had nothing but each other." And I believed her. But somewhere between her dreams and our reality, the space between us had started to stretch. Not broken, not damaged, just stretched, like a bridge still holding, but under pressure. Then came the reunion. Our 5-year wedding. Anniversary happened to fall just 2 weeks before my high school reunion. I wasn't planning to go, but Elena insisted. "I want to go," she said, beaming. "Let's show them how far we've come." And so we did. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her hair pinned back, her smile steady. I watched her walk into that ballroom like she owned it. Like the same girl who once balanced 5 plates at once could now walk beside the CEOs and socialites without flinching. They noticed. The same people who used to whisper behind our backs now came over with forced smiles and wide eyes. "Wow, Elena, you look incredible. So you run that healthy food company, right? I've seen it online." She nodded politely, never arrogant, always gracious, but I could see it in their faces. The shock, the realization, the subtle flicker of regret. Then came her Claire, my ex, the one who once told me I was throwing away my future by marrying a girl with no pedigree. She walked up, dressed in glitter and perfume, and said with that same smug tone she always had, "Well, this is unexpected." Elena extended her hand, calm and cool. "Hi, I'm Elena, his wife." Claire didn't take her hand. Elena didn't flinch, neither did I. That night, as we left the reunion, Elena took off her heels, sighing in relief. "Did I do okay?" she asked. I looked at her, at the woman who built something from nothing, who endured the sneers, the late nights, the pain, and still stood tall. "You were perfect," I said, and I meant it. But what none of them knew, not Claire, not the cousins, not the snickering guests, was that Elena was just getting started. A week after the reunion, Elena received an email that would change everything. It was from one of the top venture capital firms in the state. Someone on their team had seen her pitch deck, shared by a friend of a friend. They were interested in talking. "I think they want to invest," she said, her voice steady but her fingers trembling slightly as she held her phone. We sat on the worn-out couch in our apartment, the same couch we'd bought second-hand when we first got married. The cushions sagged, the springs creaked, but in that moment it felt like the center of the universe. We stayed up all night preparing for the call. She rehearsed her pitch. I grilled her with questions. We even went through her old failed versions to anticipate what they might ask. And the next morning she nailed it. They offered her a deal. Not just a small investment like the last one. This was big, life-changing, enough for a real team, real operations, real nationwide distribution. Held each other in stunned silence when the call ended. I could feel her heartbeat through her chest. "This is it," she whispered, and it was. Within a few months, everything accelerated. We moved into a better apartment. Nothing too flashy, just clean and quiet. She hired a full-time team, her calendar filled with meetings, interviews, and travel. Her name started appearing in industry blogs, then small magazines, then local TV. I watched her grow, not just in success, but in confidence, clarity, and power. But with growth. I aimed distance. It started small. A dinner here, a weekend there, missed for just one more meeting. I told myself it was temporary, that this was the price of chasing something extraordinary, and I believed it because I had to. But the quiet. Moments between us became fewer. She used to fall asleep next to me, holding my hand. Now, more often than not, I'd find her passed out on the couch with a laptop open on her chest. I didn't blame her. I couldn't. But I missed her. She was becoming a public figure. And with that came new faces. Polished, fast-talking executives, smooth venture capitalists, fashionable influencers who reached out to her for collabs and synergies. The kind of people who once laughed at her, now wanted to be near her. And among them was Nathan. He was a strategic advisor, assigned by one of her investors to help guide her expansion. On paper, he was just another suit, but he was charming, too charming. He smiled too much, lingered too long, complimented her ideas with just enough. Flirtation to make me notice. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that he was just doing his job, that Elena would never let anything or anyone come between us. But one night after a long day, I came home to find her laughing at something on her phone. When I asked what it was, she hesitated. Just for a second? Nothing, just a meme Nathan sent, she said, brushing it off. And that pause, it stayed with me. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront her. But something shifted. I started helping out less with the business. Not out of resentment, but because I didn't feel like I belonged in her world anymore. Her world was growing faster than I could follow, and I didn't want to be the anchor that slowed her down. One evening, we were invited to a gala, her first major event as a rising entrepreneur of the year. She looked stunning in a black evening gown, her hair up, her eyes sparkling. She didn't just fit in with the room of millionaires and media, she outshone them. And yet, as I stood beside her wearing the same suit I'd worn to 5 weddings and a job interview, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider. During dinner, a woman leaned over and asked me, "So, what do you do?" I smiled, politely. "I help with operations a bit." "Oh," she said with a practiced smile, "that's sweet." That's sweet, as if I were some charity case, as if I didn't matter, as if I were lucky to be invited at all. That night, as we rode home in silence, I kept my eyes on the passing streetlights. Elena finally broke the quiet. "Why didn't you say anything tonight?" she asked. "About what?" "About the award, the speech, anything. You were so quiet." I looked at her, the woman who had gone from diner floors to red carpets, because it wasn't my moment. It was yours. She reached for my hand, but I turned slightly toward the window. I wasn't angry, just tired of being the shadow in her spotlight, and yet I still loved her, desperately, because behind the gowns and the gloss I knew the girl who poured coffee with a smile, the girl who made me laugh when I had nothing left, the girl who built something incredible, not in spite of her past, but because of it. I wasn't jealous of her success. I was afraid of losing us in the process, but life has a way of pulling the threads tighter before anything unravels. A few weeks later, I overheard something that stopped me cold. She was on a video call in her home office, door slightly ajar. I wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally, but I caught a sentence that sank like ice in my stomach. "I know he doesn't get it, Nathan," she said quietly. "He still sees me as the girl I was, not the woman I've become." I stood there, frozen. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right, and that realization burned more than any insult from our past. She had outgrown the box the world put her in, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to outgrow me too. That night I didn't sleep. Her words kept echoing in my head. He still sees me as the girl I was. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. The waitress with hopeful eyes, the woman who used to scribble business ideas in the margins of napkins, I missed her. But the woman she was becoming, and she was powerful, magnetic, respected, and I was starting to feel invisible. Still, I didn't confront her, not with anger, not with bitterness. Instead, I stepped back, gently, quietly. I started waking up earlier than her, making coffee, cleaning up, taking walks alone to clear my head. I knew I needed to find my footing again, not just as her husband, but as a man who didn't rely on someone else's light to feel seen. That's when I decided to revisit an old project I'd abandoned years ago, a consulting concept I once dreamed of building. I never thought I'd actually pursue it, but now I needed something to remind myself who I was, what I could be. I spent my nights studying, writing, building quietly in the background. I didn't tell Elena right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to own it first. I needed to succeed on my own terms, not as Elena's husband. And slowly, I began to rebuild. Meanwhile, I watched her world spin. Faster TV interviews, Forbes mentions, partnerships, endorsements. Everywhere I looked, there she was, smiling, poised, unshakable, except something in her smile had started to fade. There were cracks. Moments when she would sit on the couch, in her designer heels, and just stare into space. Nights when she didn't touch her dinner. Days when her phone rang non-stop, and she wouldn't answer any of them. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. and for the first time, I saw her as both women, the girl I fell in love with, and the woman the world now celebrated. But I also saw something else. She was lonely. In chasing the dream, she had outpaced the world around her. And now, she stood at the top of a mountain no one else had climbed with her. One night she came home late, past midnight. I was still awake, working quietly on my laptop. She dropped her bag by the door and just stood there, not saying a word. I looked up. She didn't move. "Elena?" I asked gently. She walked over, sat beside me, and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I think I'm losing myself," she whispered. I closed the laptop and held her. No words, no advice, just silence. Because I knew that in her world of chaos, what she needed most was stillness, something real, someone who didn't want her because she was successful, but because she was her. From that night on, things shifted, not overnight. Not dramatically, but slowly. She began asking about my project, not just out of politeness, but with real curiosity. "Can I see your draft?" she asked one morning, holding her coffee. I nodded, surprised, nervous. She read it quietly, eyes scanning the screen, then she smiled. "This is good," she said, "really good." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that from her. It was the first time in a long time that we felt like equals again. Partners. But the world wasn't ready to let her go so easily. Nathan, the advisor, had begun pushing harder, suggesting aggressive expansions, risky marketing campaigns, even a merger with another firm. Elena was hesitant. She wanted to grow sustainably. He wanted fast money, and when she pushed back, things turned ugly. He began leaking stories, small things, suggestions that she was difficult, that she was emotional, that she didn't have the experience to handle the scale her company had reached. It wasn't obvious at first, but I noticed the change in how people spoke to her. The hesitation, the guarded tone in investor calls, the shift in press language from admiration to subtle doubt. One night, after a particularly cold board meeting, she came home shaken. "They're turning on me," she said, her voice cracking, for the first time in months. "They think I've peaked, that I can't lead." I looked at her. Not the CEO, not the public figure, but the woman I married. "They don't know who they're dealing with," I said quietly. And in that moment, a fire returned to her eyes. But this time it wasn't just about business, it was personal. I told her everything I'd been working on, my consulting venture, the traction I was starting to get, the clients I had lined up. Her eyes widened. "You've been doing all this?" I nodded. I wanted to remind myself who I was, not just your husband, but someone who still had something to offer. She reached out, took my hand. I never stopped seeing that. I just forgot how to say it. And just like that, we started to find our way back to each other, together. But before anything could fully heal, something needed to be done. Nathan had to go. He wasn't just a bad fit. He was a threat to everything she built, but Elena knew better than to confront him head-on. Had a plan, and I was going to help her execute it. We didn't strike with noise. We moved in silence. Elena had always believed that power wasn't in the shouting, but in the pause after the room goes quiet. And that's exactly how she planned to handle Nathan. She didn't want drama. She wanted results, and for that we needed leverage. I began digging, not out of spite, but protection. I called in favors from a few of my old colleagues in corporate compliance. Nathan had a trail, and where there's ambition unchecked, there's usually arrogance, and arrogance leaves fingerprints. It didn't take long. Turns out Nathan had a habit of advising companies just long enough to steer them into dependency, and then positioning himself for buyouts. Or worse, manipulating them into mergers where he could siphon control from the inside. He'd done it twice before. Once with a wellness brand, once with a delivery startup. Both founders ended up quietly stepping down after creative differences. Neither spoke about him again. When I showed Elena the files, she stared at the screen, silent. Then she whispered, "He thought I wouldn't notice." But she had, and now she had proof. The first move was subtle. She scheduled a private call with the board's legal counsel, under the guise of discussing policy expansion. During the meeting, she gently mentioned the red flags we had discovered, without accusing, without drama, just facts. Documented, tied to names, numbers, timelines. The lawyer took notes, didn't say much, but by the end of the week, Nathan was quietly asked to step back from his advisory role pending internal review. He didn't go quietly. He called Elena the next day. "You think this is going to stop me?" he said. "You needed me," she answered calmly. "No, you needed me. You just didn't realize it." And then she hung up. No more words. That week, she restructured her executive team, bringing in 2 seasoned women from companies she'd admired for years. Both of them had been passed over by their former employers. She gave them freedom, trust, and equity, and just like that, the company felt new again. There was energy, there was clarity, and for the first time in a long while, Elena was smiling again. Not the performative kind, the real kind, the one I used to see when we shared instant noodles and talked about impossible dreams. But Nathan wasn't done. One morning, I woke up to headlines. Sources claim internal turmoil at wellness startup led by former Waitress turned CEO. Anonymous. Insider alleges leadership conflict, financial mismanagement. We knew exactly who the source was, and we knew the story wasn't true. But rumors are like gasoline on dry leaves. It didn't matter if the fire was false, it burned just the same. I walked into the living room where Elena sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand. Scrolling through the noise, her face was calm, but her hands were shaking. "You okay?" I asked softly. She nodded. "I've worked too hard for this." And then she stood up, not broken, not panicked, determined. "Let's go," she said. "To where?" "To them." She meant the press. She meant the board. She meant everyone. We spent that day preparing her official statement. Transparent, honest, detailed. We laid out every number, every growth chart, every verified transaction. We included timelines of Nathan's involvement, what he had proposed and why she had refused. And at the end of the statement, she added one line, short, simple, but razor sharp. "I built this company with integrity, and I'll protect it." With the same fire I built it with. The media picked it up within hours. Some remained skeptical, but many rallied behind her. The Waitress turned CEO narrative was no longer just a novelty. It became a symbol of grit, of vision, of a woman who wouldn't be bullied out of her own empire. And Nathan, he disappeared from the conversation. Just like that. No lawsuits, no public counter, just silence, which, in our world, meant defeat. A few days later, we celebrated with a small dinner at home. Just the 2 of us, no gala, no cameras, just wine and quiet music, and a shared look across the table that said, "We're still here." I reached across and held her hand. "I'm proud of you," I said. She smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the man standing in her shadow. I felt like her equal again. But deep down, I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. Because while the first battle had been won quietly, the real twist hadn't even happened yet. We thought it was over. We thought Nathan had crawled back into whatever shadowy corner he came from, licking his wounds in silence. But we were wrong. 1 month after her public statement cleared the air, Elena received a formal letter. He was suing her. Defamation, character damage, breach of contract. It was laughable, transparent, a desperate attempt to claw back relevance. But lawsuits, even baseless ones, demand attention. They drain energy, time, money, the very things Elena had spent years pouring into her company. Saw the fatigue in her eyes return, not fear, just exhaustion. "I'm tired, love," she whispered one night lying beside me in bed. "All I wanted was to build something real. And now I have to fight for the right to keep it." I held her close. "You're not alone," I said. "And this time, I have something." Because what Nathan didn't know, what no one knew, was that during those quiet months when I'd been rebuilding myself, I'd also been watching, listening, documenting. I had kept records of emails, voice notes, Text messages Elena had once brushed off as unimportant. Small things. But small. Things add up when someone's trying to rewrite history, and then I found it. A voicemail. One he had left her late one night during the early investor days. She had saved it without thinking. Buried deep in a folder she never used. In it, his voice slurred slightly, probably from a drink or two, but clear. Enough to be damning. You're nothing without me, Elena, don't forget that. You might have married someone who believes in your fairy tale, but when this falls apart, I'll be the one holding the strings. I played it back twice, 3 times. Then I sent it to our attorney. The next 48 hours moved like wildfire. Our legal team filed a counterclaim, breach of ethics, malicious intent, reputation sabotage. They compiled a dossier that included the voicemail, the leaked stories traced back to his IP, and sworn statements from 2 former clients who had been burned by him in the past but were afraid to speak until now. And just when we thought we were ready to go to court, he backed down. Officially, the lawsuit was withdrawn due to unforeseen developments, but privately he sent one last email. You'll regret crossing me. Elena read it, then deleted it. No response, no drama. Just done. But the twist wasn't Nathan's fall. It was what came after. The very night the suit was dropped, Elena was invited to speak at a global innovation conference in Singapore. A last-minute spot had opened up. The speaker who had cancelled, Nathan. He had been blacklisted. Quietly, without fanfare, his reputation dissolved. No big headline, no courtroom finale. Just an absence that spoke louder than any noise. And Elena, she, stepped into that slot. She walked onto a stage in front of 10,000 people from all corners of the world, introduced not just as a CEO, but as a visionary. A woman who had turned rejection into revolution, who built a company from the ground up and stood unshaken through storms that would have buried most. I sat in the front row. Not as a husband, not as a footnote, but as the man who stood with her when no one else did, as the only one who saw her fire long before it lit up the sky. When she spoke, she didn't mention the lawsuits, or the rumors, or Nathan. She didn't need to. She told the story of a waitress who poured coffee with a dream in her chest and no roadmap to follow. A woman who faced condescension, disrespect and doubt, but never let it define her. And then she paused. Her eyes found mine, and she said, I wasn't alone. I had someone who saw me, not for what I was, but for what I could become. Someone who stood in the shadows and clapped for me louder than the crowd ever could. The room went still. And God help me, I cried, for all the years we'd endured, for every insult we swallowed, for every silent night and whispered doubt. Because in that moment, she wasn't just reclaiming her story, she was reclaiming ours after. The speech. She walked off the stage past cameras and reporters and CEOs waiting to congratulate her, and she came straight to me. No spotlight, no applause, just us. And in her eyes, I saw everything, the waitress, the CEO, the woman I married, all still there, still mine. But this wasn't the end of our story, because there was still one more moment left to come, one more truth the world didn't yet know. 2 months after that speech, we stood on a rooftop in Manhattan watching the city flicker below us. It wasn't some grand celebration. It wasn't for press or show. It was just the 2 of us. No suits, no schedules, no screens. She leaned against me, barefoot, holding a glass of water, too tired even for wine. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and she wore one of my old shirts like a dress. That's how I loved her most. Not in gowns or on magazine covers, but like this, real, present, ours. We watched the night in silence like people who had survived something only the 2 of them could understand. And then she said it. You know, she whispered. They were right. I turned to her, confused. Who? The ones who laughed, the ones who said I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong. They were right, about me back then. I stayed quiet, listening. I was just a waitress. I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared and insecure and pretending half the time. I reached for her hand. But I wasn't pretending with you, she continued. With you, I was me. And that gave me the strength to become everything they thought I couldn't. That's when I finally understood what this whole journey was really about. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. She didn't build an empire to get revenge. She built it because someone finally gave her the space to believe she could. And I had been lucky enough to be that someone. The media loved to tell the story of the waitress who became a billionaire. It made great headlines, inspirational, unexpected, but they never told the other half. The story of the man who married her when she was still pouring coffee and coming home with aching feet. The man who stood beside her while others laughed behind their wine glasses. The man who knew that strength isn't always loud, and that some of the most powerful victories happen without a single raised voice. We left that rooftop that night without saying much else, but everything felt lighter. The next morning, Elena announced a new initiative, a venture fund for female entrepreneurs from underserved backgrounds. She named it after her grandmother, the woman who raised her when no one else did. Applications flooded in from across the country. Some from single mothers, some from refugees, some from women working 3 jobs just to survive. And in every application, I saw pieces of Elena, her fire, her grit, her belief in possibility, and she funded them, not just with money, but with mentorship, with community, with hope. Years passed. The world kept changing. But our story remained. Sometimes I still hear the whispers, the old jokes. A stranger online posting, "He really married a waitress? Lucky guy." And maybe I was. But not because of who she was, because of who she chose to become, and who she never let go. Thov, last month on our 10th anniversary, she surprised me. A cabin in the mountains. Just us. No staff, no press, no service. We cooked on a gas stove, played board games, read books to each other by candlelight. On the last night, as we sat by the fire, she pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold watch, engraved underneath. Were 5 words, "For the man who stayed." And I cried, because in a world that chases noise, fast wins, and bigger titles, she saw me, still, always, not as her anchor, but as her equal. People still ask me, "What's it like being married to a billionaire?" And I smile, because the real answer doesn't fit in headlines or interviews. It's in every moment she chose to keep going. It's in every time she reached back for my hand. And it's in the quiet truth I carry with me every day. They laughed when I married a waitress. But they'll never understand what it means, to be loved by a woman who built herself from nothing. And I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.